Welcome once again to the accounting classroom. I am your presenter, Agnes Seeley, and we are now at part 3 of our demonstration video with respect to our example question, We Do It Right Incorporated. In our previous video, we would have looked at preparing our equivalent units table for the cost and calculating equivalent units for all the cost elements relating to this question. And we came up with our total equivalent units for process 1 material, added material, labor, and production overhead. So in this video, what we'll be looking at firstly is going into our step 2, where we have to compute the cost per equivalent unit. And we will be computing the cost per equivalent unit for each cost element. So we'll be doing it for process 1 material, added material, labor, and production overhead. Right? So in order to calculate our cost per equivalent unit, we need to know the cost incurred with respect to process 1 material, added material, labor, and production overhead. And we also need to know what are the equivalent units for the total equivalent units for each of these cost elements. And the total equivalent units are listed here in our equivalent unit table. As mentioned previously, for process 1, $27.50, added materials $27.30, labor $26.35, and production overhead the same $26.35. So, but what are the costs incurred? Let's look at the question. It states here in number 2, during May 2008, 2,750 units were transferred from process 1, so those are our input units, into process 2. And those were transferred at a valuation of $12,460. So process 1 material value, or the cost incurred for process 1 material with respect to these units that were transferred, is $12,460. So cost incurred for process 1 material, $12,460. What are the equivalent units for process 1 material? 2,750 units. So therefore, and I've already had my formula here, so 12,460 divided by 2750 give us a cost per equivalent unit of $4.53090991 Okay, so whenever you're doing these questions here and you are calculating the cost per equivalent unit, do not round to the nearest decimal, the nearest whole number. Do not round to the nearest whole number, and do not round to the 2 decimal places. What you do is that the amount of decimal places that you find in your calculator, you put back those same amount of decimal places in the question. Because when we start to do some rounding, sometimes then we end up with some numbers a bit off, and then the process 2 account may not come out the way that you expect it to because of rounding errors. So please do not round your cost per equivalent unit at this stage. So what is the cost for added material? Our added material cost was $3,003. Okay. So process 1, 12,460, added materials $3,003. So 3,003. And the equivalent units, total equivalent units for added material is 2730. So when we take our 2730 and divide it, when we take our $3,003 and divide it by 2730 equivalent units, we get $1.10 as our cost here per equivalent unit. So this is $1.10. So there's no problem rounding here to 2 decimal places because all the other places here are zeros. So this is $1.10. The labor cost incurred so far was $5,980. And the equivalent units for labor is 2635. So 5,980 divided by 2,635 gives us a cost per equivalent unit for labor of $2.269449715. And then finally, our production overhead costs incurred. It said that production overhead amounting to $2,108 were also absorbed during this process. So 2108. And the total equivalent units on production overhead is also 2635. So $2,108 divided by 2635 give us 80 cents. So again here I can round this. Why? Because the other figures here are zeros. So when I have all of these zeros here, I can put this to 2 decimal places and say 80 cents. And this one can go to 2 decimal places and say $1.10. So then we have to take the cost per equivalent unit for process 1, materials, added materials, labor, and production overhead. Add those together and that will give us our total cost per equivalent unit. Now we need this total cost per equivalent unit because we have to calculate the cost of our fully completed units. And that can only be computed by using the total cost per equivalent unit because your fully completed units will have process 1 material, added material, labor, and production overhead included in it. So therefore, you need to have all the cost of equivalent units, all the costs per equivalent unit for all of those cost elements added together so that you get the total cost per equivalent unit to be able to calculate what is the value of your fully completed units. So our total cost per equivalent unit is $8.700358806. So now we have completed step 2. So since we have completed step 2, we are now going to move on to our step 3. And our step 3 is where we are going to evaluate the cost of our inventory units, or in other words, we are going to value our inventory units. So let's go to another sheet with step 3. So here I already have my table prepared for step 3 evaluation of inventory units. I have my details here, which is my equivalent units, column for equivalent unit, cost per equivalent unit, and total cost. Now we have our opening, or it is going to start with our opening inventory. What were our units at the beginning? So our opening inventory units at the beginning were 450 units. But what was the value of that 450 units at the beginning? Those 450 units, they stated that the cost incurred to date had in process 1 material of $2,025, added material $1,395, and conversion of $1,350. So you have to add all 3 of these figures together to work out what is the value of these 450 units at the beginning. So here I already have a calculation here. So my opening inventory, my balance brought down, and that would be the $2,025 plus the $1,395 plus the $1,350. So when I add these together, that gives me opening inventory value of $4,770. So my opening inventory units were 450 units, and those are valued at $4,770. Okay, so now we have to look at calculating the remaining costs incurred on the opening inventory. So that remaining cost opening calculated on this opening inventory here. So we have 450 units at the beginning. So they were not fully completed at the beginning. They still needed work. So we have to calculate the cost that was incurred on these 450 with respect to each cost element, like process one material, added material, labor, and production overhead. How are we going to do that? We're going to do that by looking for the equivalent units for each cost element, and then the cost per equivalent unit for each of them. So here, the equivalent units for process one was 0. And then we have the cost per equivalent unit here. So the equivalent units were 0. I'm not saying you don't have to do this if there is no value on process one material. You can go straight to adding material, labor, and production overhead. But I want to show this because in another question that you may have equivalent units on your process one material, and if that happens, then you need to know that it has to be included as part of your remaining costs incurred on opening inventory. So the cost per equivalent unit for that is 4.53090991, and then you multiply the 0 by the cost per equivalent unit, you get 0. Added material. What are our equivalent units for added material? Equivalent units for added material with respect to opening inventory is 180 units. And for labor and production overhead, there are 45 units each. So let's look at that. 180 for added material, 45 for labor, and 45 production overhead equivalent units. So what is the cost per equivalent unit for added materials? Cost per equivalent unit is $1.10. Cost per equivalent unit for labor is 2.26, etc. And for production overhead is 80 cents. So production overhead is 80 cents. And for labor, it is 2.269449715. So when we take the 180 and multiply it by $1.10, we get 198. 45 multiplied by this number here, we get 102. And 45 multiplied by 80, we get 80 cents, we get 36. So far, the total cost for our 450 units, which I am including my opening balance, is $5,106. So 4,770 plus 198 plus 102 plus 36. Total cost $5,106. Now we're going to pause here, and we are going to come back in our next video, and we are going to complete the evaluation of our inventory, and then we are going to be looking at our process 2 account. Like, subscribe. Thank you.